Welcome to the It Factor, where Jimmy and I exploring a new blog post by Mr. Lynn Kaplan, CEO of CDML, an MSP in Queens, NY, offering network management, VoIP and UCAs, cybersecurity compliance, IaaS, cloud, and Microsoft 365 and Azure.
Sounds pretty comprehensive.
If you're a small business owner or manage IT for a growing organization, this episode is for you. Stay tuned.
So diving into IT compliance today.
You got it. Focusing on regulations that medical providers in New York have to navigate. I bet this is relatable even if you're not in healthcare. Think about all the sensitive data you handle every day. Customer information, financial records, employee details.
It is a lot to keep track of.
And last thing you want is a data breach or legal trouble, right?
Absolutely. It can be super overwhelming, especially for smaller businesses without a dedicated IT team.
That's where Mr. Kaplan's blog post comes in.
Breaking it down.
He focuses on HIPAA, the NY Shield Act, and PCI DSS.
Okay, makes sense.
Let's start with HIPAA, since most people have heard of it. You might think it's all about fancy tech and encryption, but what stood out to me in Mr. Kaplan's post was the human element.
Yeah, it often is overlooked. We tend to think about data security as a purely technical problem, but the reality is people are often the weakest link.
Exactly. And that's why Mr. Kaplan talks about those administrative safeguards in HIPAA, things like risk assessments to figure out your vulnerabilities.
Right.
Having a solid incident response plan, just in case. And maybe most importantly, training your staff on all of this stuff. You could have the most secure systems in the world, but if someone on your team clicks a phishing link and gives away their login, game over.
Like having a high-tech security system for your house, but leaving the front door open.
Right. So while tech is important, HIPAA really pushes for that culture of security, where everyone is aware of the risks and takes responsibility for protecting sensitive data.
And the NY Shield Act takes that even further, broadening the scope beyond just healthcare. Basically, any business in New York that handles private information needs certain safeguards. Doesn't matter if it's patient data or customer details.
Like New York is saying, listen, data breaches can happen to anyone, so everyone needs to step up. What's interesting is how the Shield Act really pushes businesses to think proactively. It's not just about reacting to a breach.
Yeah.
It's about taking steps to prevent those breaches in the first place.
And one of the key things Mr. Kaplan highlights is the importance of encryption for both data in transit and data at rest, like putting your sensitive information in a locked box.
Unreadable to anyone who doesn't have the key.
Exactly.
And encryption is a big deal across all three of these regulations, isn't it?
Absolutely. HIPAA, the Shield Act, PCI DSS, encryption is non-negotiable. Which, by the way, PCI DSS is all about protecting credit card information.
Oh, right. Thanks for the reminder.
And it makes sense. It's one of the most effective ways to ensure that even if data falls into the wrong hands, it's still protected.
Right. And that brings us to PCI DSS.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of small businesses might think, oh, I'm not a big hospital system. I don't need to worry about that. But if you accept credit card payments, even just a few, you're on the hook for PCI DSS compliance.
And the consequences of non-compliance can be pretty steep.
Oh, yeah.
Hefty fines, potential lawsuits, and damage to your reputation.
Oof. Not to mention the stress of a data breach.
Exactly. So Mr. Kaplan really emphasizes the importance of having things like firewalls to protect your network, secure payment terminals, and constantly testing your security systems.
Not just setting it and forgetting it.
Right. You need to be vigilant and proactive. And that's where having a partner like an MSP can really make a difference, especially for a small business.
That's a great point. But before we dive into how CDML can help, let's take a closer look at the specifics of these regulations. Now, you might be thinking, okay, we've got HIPAA, the Shield Act, and PCI DSS, three different sets of rules, three different headaches.
Yeah.
But Mr. Kaplan points out that they actually have a lot of overlap, especially when it comes to the technology.
So it's not like you need to build three separate security systems from scratch.
Yes.
You can create a solid foundation that addresses the core requirements of all three simultaneously.
For example, we already talked about encryption, a must-have across the board. But it goes beyond that. Access control is another big one. Patient data under HIPAA, private information under the Shield Act, or credit card numbers under PCI DSS. You need to make sure that only the right people have access to the right information.
I like to think of it like this. Each employee should only have the keys to the rooms they actually need to access. No need for the receptionist to have access to the financial records. That's where something called role-based access control comes in.
Fancy way of saying you restrict access based on job responsibilities.
That's it.
So even though these regulations might seem like separate beasts, they actually share a lot of common DNA. And that's good news because it means you can streamline your efforts
Working smarter, not harder.
and create a more comprehensive security posture for your entire business.
And understanding these commonalities can save you a lot of time, money, and stress in the long run.
Absolutely. Now, I know what you're thinking. This is all great in theory, but how do I actually put this into practice?
Good question.
And that's where Mr. Kaplan and CDML come in.
I'm curious to see how they translate all of this complex regulatory stuff into actionable steps a small business can actually implement.
Well, let's find out. In the next part of his blog post, Mr. Kaplan outlines CDML's 7-step approach to helping medical providers navigate these compliance challenges. And I think a lot of these steps can be applied to any business, regardless of industry. Stay tuned.
So we've laid the groundwork, understanding that HIPAA, the NY SHIELD Act, and PCI DSS have a lot of overlap.
That's good news. Means you're not starting from scratch with each one.
Right. But I know what you're probably thinking. Okay, this is all great in theory, but where do I even begin?
Right. It can feel like a mountain of paperwork and tech jargon.
Luckily, that's where CDML comes in, with their 7-step approach.
It's like a roadmap.
Yeah.
And the first step,
Well, we've touched on it already.
comprehensive risk assessments. You can't protect what you don't know is vulnerable, right?
That's like getting a home inspection before you buy a house.
Oh, good analogy.
You want to know what you're getting into?
Identify any potential problems before they become major headaches.
Exactly.
And CDML really emphasizes that this isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of deal.
No.
They tailor each risk assessment to the specific business, taking into account their systems, their data, and their workflows.
That makes sense. A small dental practice is going to have different vulnerabilities than a large e-commerce company.
Exactly. And once they've identified those vulnerabilities, step 2 is all about robust encryption solutions. Remember how we talked about encryption being essential for all 3 regulations? CDML focuses on both data in transit and data at rest, meaning they're protecting your information, whether it's being sent across the network or just sitting on a server.
So even if someone managed to break into your system, they wouldn't be able to make sense of the data without the encryption key.
It's like having a secret code that only authorized people can decipher.
Exactly.
And it's not just about protecting the data itself. CDML also makes sure that your backups are encrypted.
Oh, that's good.
So even if the worst happens and your primary systems go down, you can rest assured that your backup data is still safe and sound.
That's a huge relief. Backups are your lifeline in a disaster scenario.
You don't want to be recovering from a cyber attack, only to realize your backups were also compromised.
No, definitely not.
Okay, so we've assessed our risks, we've got encryption in place. Now, step 3 is about controlling who has access to sensitive information. CDML sets up something called Role-Based Access Controls, or RBAC for short.
Now, I know that sounds complicated,
It does.
but it's actually pretty simple.
It is. Each employee should only have access to the information they absolutely need to do their job.
No more, no less.
Right. So the receptionist wouldn't have access to financial records, and the marketing team wouldn't have access to patient files, minimizing the risk by limiting access.
And to make it even more secure, they implement multi-factor authentication.
Right. So it's not just about knowing a password.
It's about having that second layer of verification, like a code sent to your phone or a fingerprint scan.
Like having 2 locks on your door makes
Yeah.
it that much harder for unauthorized people to get in.
Yeah.
And on top of that, they set up systems to track who's accessing what data and when. It's like having a security camera for your digital world.
So you can always see who's been coming and going.
Exactly.
That's so important because it allows you to detect suspicious activity early on. It's much easier to deal with a potential problem when it's small.
Than to wait until it's a full-blown crisis.
Exactly.
Now, step 4 is something we've talked about a bit already, but it's worth repeating. Proactive incident response planning. Even with all these security measures, you have to be prepared for the worst-case scenario.
It's like having a fire escape plan. You hope you never have to use it.
But if you do, you want to be prepared and know exactly what to do.
Exactly.
CDML helps clients develop detailed response protocols so everyone knows what steps to take if an incident occurs. And they don't just create a plan and leave it at that.
What do?
They actually run simulations
Oh, wow.
to see how everyone reacts
Yeah.
and make sure the plan is actually effective.
I love that they do those simulations. It's one thing to read a plan on paper. It's another thing entirely to put it into practice under pressure, like a fire drill for your data security.
Right. It helps everyone stay calm and collected if a real incident does occur. And then, of course, there's the ongoing monitoring and support that CDML provides They're not just setting you up and then forgetting about you.
Oh, no.
They're constantly watching for threats and helping you stay ahead of the curve.
That's crucial because the cyber threat landscape is constantly evolving. New threats are emerging all the time. You need a partner who's staying on top of those trends and helping you adapt.
So it's like having a dedicated security guard who's always on duty, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious.
Exactly. Now, the next step brings us back to something we talked about earlier, the human element. Step 5.
Right.
CDML creates customized training programs
For each business.
for each business, covering everything from HIPAA compliance and recognizing phishing scams to best practices for handling sensitive data.
And they make it fun, too. Mr. Kaplan mentioned that they use phishing simulations to test employee awareness. They'll send out fake phishing emails to see who falls for them.
Oh, that's clever.
And then they provide additional training to those who need it. It's like a game that helps everyone learn how to spot those sneaky attacks.
It's a brilliant way to turn a potential weakness into a learning opportunity. And by making it engaging, they're more likely to get buy-in from employees. No one wants to sit through a boring lecture, but everyone loves a good challenge.
Okay, on to step 6, which is all about secure payment solutions. Remember, if you're accepting credit card payments, you need to be PCI DSS compliant. CDML helps businesses implement all the necessary security measures, like firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and secure payment terminals.
With endpoint protection.
Right, and they don't just set it up and call it a day. They regularly test those systems to make sure they're up to snuff. It's about creating a multi-layered defense against any potential threats.
It's like building a fortress around your payment data, with multiple walls and guards to keep the bad guys out.
Exactly. And the final step, step 7, is all about disaster recovery and business continuity planning. This is where CDML helps businesses prepare for those worst-case scenarios, like a natural disaster or a major cyber attack.
It's like having an insurance policy for your business. You hope you never have to use it, but if you do, you want to be covered.
Exactly. They'll help you set up cloud-based backups to protect your critical data, develop disaster recovery plans to minimize downtime, and create business continuity plans to make sure you can keep operating even if your primary systems are down.
So even if the unthinkable happens, you'll be able to get back on your feet quickly.
With minimal disruption to your business.
That peace of mind is priceless, especially for small business owners who are already juggling so much.
Knowing you have experts on your side who are prepared for anything can make all the difference.
For sure.
So there you have it. CDML's 7-step approach really covers all the bases when it comes to navigating HIPAA, the NY Shield Act, and PCI DSS compliance. It's not just about checking boxes.
No, it's not.
It's about creating a comprehensive security strategy.
That takes into account all the potential risks and vulnerabilities.
And the best part is it's not just for medical providers.
Oh, good.
Any business can benefit from this approach.
Yeah, that's great.
Now, Mr. Kaplan concludes his blog post by talking about the CDML advantage. He highlights their expertise in healthcare IT, their tailored solutions, and their proactive support.
It sounds like they're really positioning themselves as a partner, not just a vendor.
Exactly. He stresses that they understand the unique challenges faced by small businesses, and they're committed to helping them achieve both peace of mind and compliance.
That peace of mind is something you can't really put a price tag on.
For sure.
Knowing you have experts on your side who are constantly monitoring and protecting your systems allows you to focus on what you do best, running your business.
So I think the key takeaway here is that compliance doesn't have to be a burden.
Right.
It can actually be an opportunity to improve your business's overall security posture,
Yeah.
protect your data,
Uh-huh.
and create a more resilient and successful operation.
Absolutely. It's about shifting your mindset from reactive to proactive. Instead of waiting for something to go wrong, you're actively taking steps to prevent those issues from arising in the first place.
And that's a smart move for any business, no matter what industry you're in.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something Mr. Kaplan mentioned in the first part of his blog post about how all of these regulations, despite seeming like separate entities, actually share a lot of common ground.
Right. And understanding those commonalities can really help you streamline your efforts, create a more efficient and effective security strategy.
For example, we talked about how encryption is essential across the board. Whether you're looking at HIPAA, the NY Shield Act, or PCI DSS, encrypting your sensitive data is a must-have.
Same goes for access control. Making sure that only authorized personnel have access to sensitive information is a fundamental security principle.
Applies to all three.
And of course, staff training is always a win. The more knowledgeable and aware your employees are, the better protected your business will be,
It's about creating that culture of security we talked about earlier.
where everyone understands the importance of protecting sensitive data and takes responsibility for their actions.
Exactly. It's not just about technology, it's about people and processes working together to create a secure environment.
So to wrap things up, I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is that compliance doesn't have to be an overwhelming task. By focusing on those shared requirements, leveraging the expertise of companies like CDML, and adopting a proactive approach, you can create a secure environment for your business and your customers.
Absolutely. It's about taking a holistic approach to security and compliance, one that recognizes the interconnected nature of these regulations and the importance of building a strong security foundation.
And that's exactly what we'll continue to explore in Part 3, where we take a closer look at the benefits of partnering with an MSP like CDML and the peace of mind that comes with knowing you have experts on your side guiding you through these complex regulations. Stay tuned. We've spent this deep dive unpacking IPO, the NY Shield Act, and PCI DSS. And we've seen how CDML helps businesses tackle these challenges head on. What stands out to you most about their approach?
Well, I think their focus on building a culture of security within a practice, it's really impressive. It's not just about ticking boxes or avoiding penalties.
Right.
CDML is really promoting an environment where data is truly protected and the practice itself is resilient.
It's refreshing, right? It's a
Yeah.
far cry from the set it and forget it mentality we see with some tech solutions.
Yeah, and I think that's particularly important for small businesses who might not have those dedicated IT departments.
Yeah.
Partnering with a company like CDML gives them access to specialized knowledge and those tailored solutions that we were talking about.
Mr. Kaplan really drives that point home in his blog post, too.
Yeah.
He emphasizes that the CDML team, they get it. They understand the specific challenges healthcare providers face.
Right.
They're not just IT experts, they're healthcare IT experts.
It's like a good point. It's subtle, but it makes a world of difference, They can anticipate the needs of a medical practice. They speak the language. They offer solutions that are both practical and effective in that specific context.
And he also highlights that ongoing support, that constant monitoring.
Right.
It offers incredible peace of mind knowing that someone's got your back.
That peace of mind is invaluable, especially when you're dealing with something as sensitive as patient data. Medical professionals, they have enough on their plates. Knowing that the technical side of things is being handled by experts who are dedicated to keeping their data safe, it lets them focus on what really matters.
The patients.
Exactly.
It strikes me that this entire conversation has implications beyond just healthcare.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you're a small business owner, an entrepreneur, or just someone who's concerned about data privacy, these principles, they still apply.
Absolutely. I mean, we live in a world where data is currency, right?
It is.
Being informed about these regulations, even if they don't apply to you directly, it can help you implement best practices,
For sure.
Make informed decisions about your own data security.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question. Knowing what you now know about these regulations and the importance of a proactive approach, what's one step you can take today to improve your own data security? Maybe it's enabling two-factor authentication on your email accounts.
Yeah.
Maybe it's having a conversation with your team about cybersecurity. Every step, no matter how small, makes a difference.
It's all about taking ownership of your digital security and realizing that you have the power to make a difference.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into IT compliance. We hope you found it informative and empowering. Remember, staying secure isn't just about technology. It's about awareness, action, and a commitment to protecting what matters most. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay secure.